My children arrived at the lawyer's office laughing, already planning how to spend their father's millions. But when the safe opened and revealed a single photograph, their grins twisted into expressions of pure horror. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The morning they buried my husband Robert, I watched my 3 children whispering in the church parking lot. They thought I couldn't see them from where I stood, accepting condolences from old friends. But after 42 years of marriage and raising 3 children, a mother knows when something's wrong. James kept checking his phone. Sarah was practically bouncing on her heels, and Michael, my youngest, actually smiled before catching himself. At their father's funeral. My name is Margaret Ellis, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. The story I'm about to tell you still makes my hands shake, even 6 months later. It's about how the children I gave my entire life to became strangers, and how my husband's final act of love saved me from beyond the grave. You need to understand who I was before all this happened. I wasn't some wealthy socialite or heiress. I was a nurse who worked double shifts at Riverside General for 30 years. When other mothers were attending PTA meetings in designer clothes, I was showing up in my scrubs, sometimes with blood still under my fingernails from emergency surgeries. I never missed a single school play, baseball game, or parent-teacher conference, even if it meant going without sleep for 36 hours straight. Robert and I married young, full of dreams. I'd wanted to become a doctor, had even gotten accepted to medical school. But then James came along unexpectedly, and Robert's construction business was just starting. Someone had to provide stable income while he built his company from nothing. So I put on my nursing shoes and never looked back. That's what you did for family. You sacrificed without keeping score. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. I baked cookies every Sunday, not from some Pinterest recipe, but from my grandmother's handwritten card that was stained with decades of use. The kitchen table had gouges from where Sarah practiced her science projects, burns from Michael's chemistry set, and ink stains from James doing his medical school applications. Every mark told a story of a life lived fully, of children raised with devotion. The neighborhood knew me as the woman who organized meal trains for sick families, who kept extra lunch money in her purse for kids who forgot theirs, who taught free first aid classes at the community center. When Robert's business finally took off in our 50s, we didn't move to a bigger house or buy fancy cars. We paid off our children's student loans, helped with their weddings, invested in their futures. Robert was my anchor, through it all. Quiet, steady Robert who brought me coffee in bed every morning for 4 decades, who still left me love notes in my lunch bag, who held my hand during every medical test when the years of physical nursing took their toll on my back and knees. When he got sick with cancer 2 years ago, I took early retirement to care for him. We spent those final months reminiscing, looking through old photos, planning what we'd leave behind for our children and 7 grandchildren. I thought we'd raise them right. I thought the values we'd instilled, the love we'd shown, the sacrifices they'd witnessed would mean something. But grief and greed change people in ways you can't imagine until you're living through it. Those final months before Robert passed were strangely beautiful, the way autumn leaves are most vibrant just before they fall. Every morning followed the same cherished routine we'd built over 4 decades together. Robert would wake at 6:30, shuffle to the kitchen in his worn blue slippers, and start the coffee maker. I'd find him there 10 minutes later, arranging 2 cups just so, mine with 1 sugar and cream, his black as midnight. We'd sit on our back porch, watching cardinals visit the feeder he'd built during his first round of chemotherapy. When he still had energy to work with wood, the garden became my sanctuary during those days. Robert would settle into his favorite chair with the morning newspaper, occasionally reading interesting bits aloud while I tended to my roses and tomatoes. The roses were particularly beautiful that year, deep red climbers that had taken 15 years to establish properly along our fence, Robert joked that they bloomed so magnificently because they knew he was watching. I'd trim dead heads and tell him about my plans for next season's vegetables, both of us pretending we didn't wonder if he'd see them grow. Tuesdays were grocery days. Robert insisted on coming along even when walking became difficult. He'd lean on the cart while I shopped, sneaking unnecessary items into it when I wasn't looking. Chocolate cookies for the grandkids' visits, those expensive nuts he loved, fresh flowers just because. The teenage cashier at Morrison's Market knew us by name, always asking after our family, complimenting Robert on his cardigan collection. Such simple interactions that felt like threads weaving us into the fabric of ordinary life. Thursday afternoons meant doctor appointments, but we'd turned even those into something bearable. We'd stop at Romano's bakery afterward, sharing a cannoli in the car like teenagers on a date. Robert would inevitably get cream on his nose, and I'd laugh while wiping it off with a napkin. The treatment was working, his oncologist said. We had time. We had hope. But Sundays remained sacred. Sunday dinners with the entire family around our dining room table, the one Robert had bought at an estate sale and refinished himself when James was still in diapers. I'd spend all morning cooking, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green beans with almonds, homemade rolls that made the whole house smell like heaven. The grandchildren would burst through the door without knocking, calling out, "Grandma, Grandpa," like tiny tornadoes of joy. Those dinners were loud, chaotic, and perfect. Sarah's twins would argue over who got to sit next to Grandpa. Michael's teenage son would actually put his phone down to listen to Robert's stories about building his business. James's daughter, studying pre-med, would pepper me with questions about my nursing days. The adult children would help clear plates, wash dishes, their laughter echoing from the kitchen, while Robert and I sat contentedly, watching the grandkids play in the living room. Between these anchor points were quieter moments. Wednesday night television programs we'd watched for years, neither of us willing to admit we'd lost track of the plot seasons ago. Afternoon naps on the couch, my head on Robert's shoulder, his hand resting on mine. Evening walks around the block that grew shorter as his strength waned. But we took them anyway, waving at neighbors, stopping to admire Mrs. Patterson's daisies. Robert's study remained his sanctuary, where he'd spend hours organizing papers, making phone calls, working on what he called getting affairs in order. I'd bring him tea and find him surrounded by documents, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every bit the successful businessman he'd become. He'd always quickly close folders when I entered, saying he didn't want me worrying about boring financial matters. I trusted him completely. After 42 years, why wouldn't I? Looking back now, the signs were there. The peace was too perfect, like the calm before a hurricane makes landfall. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks before Robert died. I'd come home early from my volunteer shift at the Literacy Center because Margaret Holloway had arrived to cover the rest of my hours. The house felt different the moment I opened the door. It wasn't empty. I could hear voices coming from Robert's study. But something in the air felt wrong, like walking into a room where people had just stopped arguing. James's Mercedes was in the driveway, which was odd for a Tuesday. He rarely visited during the week, always claiming his surgical schedule at the hospital kept him too busy. But there he was, his voice carrying through the study door, speaking in low, urgent tones with Robert. I heard Sarah's laugh, too. That nervous giggle she'd had since childhood, when she was doing something she shouldn't. Even Michael was there, and he lived 40 minutes away and complained about gas prices every time he visited. I set down my purse quietly, instinctively moving with the silence I'd learned during night shifts when patients were sleeping. As I approached the study, I heard James say something about power of attorney and, "While there's still time." Then Sarah's voice, sharper than usual, mentioned something about protecting assets. Michael added something about tax implications. My hand was on the doorknob when suddenly the conversation stopped. They'd heard me somehow. When I opened the door, the scene that greeted me was almost comical in its obvious guilt. James was standing by Robert's desk, his hand on a stack of papers that he quickly moved away from. Sarah sat in the leather chair across from Robert, her phone in her lap, her thumb still poised over the screen like she'd been in mid-text. Michael stood by the window, suddenly fascinated by the bird feeder outside, and Robert, my dear Robert, looked pale and tired in his desk chair, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Mom!" Sarah's voice was too bright, too cheerful. "You're home early." "The literacy center was covered," I said, looking from one face to another. "I didn't know we were having a family meeting." James recovered first, always the smoothest talker of my children. "Not a meeting, Mom. Just stopped by to check on Dad and happened to run into Sarah and Michael. You know how it is." He glanced at his watch, a Rolex that seemed to get bigger and flashier every time I saw it. "Actually, I should get going. Surgery in the morning." They all left within 5 minutes, a flurry of goodbye kisses on my cheek and promises to see me Sunday. But Sarah's hug lasted a second too long, like she was apologizing for something. Michael wouldn't look me in the eye, and James squeezed my shoulder in that patronizing way that reminded me he thought anyone without a medical degree couldn't possibly understand complex matters. After they left, I found Robert still in his study, staring at his computer screen. "What was that about?" I asked, sitting in the chair Sarah had vacated. "Nothing important, dear," he said, closing his laptop. "Just going over some insurance paperwork. The kids worry too much." But his hands shook slightly as he organized the papers on his desk, sliding them into a folder before I could see what they were. In 42 years of marriage, Robert's hands had only shaken 3 times. When James was born premature, when he'd nearly lost his business in 2008, and when the doctor first said the word cancer. That night, as we lay in bed, Robert held me closer than usual. He stroked my hair and told me he loved me 3 times before falling asleep. The last time he'd been that affectionate out of nowhere was right before he'd told me about his diagnosis. I lay awake for hours, listening to his labored breathing, wondering what secret was eating at him now. Over the next few days, the strange visits continued. I'd come home to find one or more of my children's cars in the driveway. They'd always have reasonable explanations, but their timing was too perfect, like they knew exactly when I'd be out. I became an expert at explaining away what my heart knew was wrong. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We build fortresses of excuses for our children, brick by brick, until we can't see the truth standing right in front of us. Every strange occurrence, every whispered conversation, every guilty look. I had a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of it. When I found James in Robert's study the following Thursday photographing documents with his phone, he told me he was helping organize medical records for Robert's oncologist. Of course, that made sense. James was a doctor himself, wasn't he? He understood these things better than I did. When I offered to help, he patted my hand and said, "Mom, you do so much already. Let us handle the paperwork. You just focus on taking care of Dad." I made him his favorite sandwich, turkey with extra mustard, and pushed down the voice in my head asking why medical records were kept in the filing cabinet marked Financial Holdings. Sarah called me the next day, casually asking about our safety deposit box at the bank. Did I know where the key was? Had I been there recently? She was thinking of getting one herself, she said, and wanted my advice about what to store in it. Such an innocent question from a daughter to her mother. I told her where we kept the spare key, in the ceramic rooster cookie jar above the refrigerator, the one she'd made in 6th grade art class. It never occurred to me to ask why she needed to know about our box specifically when she could have asked about safety deposit boxes in general. Michael's behavior was the hardest to rationalize, but I managed that too. He started stopping by during his lunch breaks, which was unusual since his office was 30 minutes away. He'd spend these visits in the garage with Robert, going through old boxes. Dad wanted to show me his vintage tools, he explained when I brought them lemonade, thinking of taking up woodworking as a hobby. The fact that Michael had never shown interest in manual labor in his entire life seemed like a detail I could overlook. People change. Perhaps facing his father's mortality had given him new appreciation for Robert's craftsmanship. The mind is remarkable in its ability to protect us from truths we're not ready to face. When I overheard Sarah on the phone saying, "We need to move faster, she's getting suspicious," I convinced myself she was planning a surprise for my upcoming birthday. When I noticed Robert's signature on papers looked shakier than usual, I attributed it to the new medication, making his hands unsteady. When our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, mentioned seeing all 3 kids' cars at our house during my regular Tuesday volunteer shift, I smiled and said they were probably planning something special for their father. I even explained away Robert's behavior, the way he'd suddenly stop talking when I entered a room, how he'd asked me 3 times if I remembered our anniversary date, as if testing my memory. The afternoon I found him crying at his desk, clutching our wedding photo, and he said he was just emotional from the medication. I held him, told him everything would be fine, and made his favorite dinner to cheer him up. One evening, I walked into our bedroom to find Robert on the phone. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said, then saw me and quickly added, "about the surprise party." But my birthday was still 3 months away and his eyes couldn't meet mine. I chose to believe him. I chose to trust the man who'd never lied to me in 4 decades, even though something in my chest tightened like a fist. Looking back, I realize I was like someone standing in a house on fire, explaining away the smoke as burnt toast, the heat as a broken thermostat, the flames as tricks of the light. Denial is comfortable. It's safe. It lets you live in your carefully constructed world just a little bit longer, before everything you thought you knew comes crashing down around you. The last morning Robert and I had coffee together, he held my hand across our little porch table and said, "Margaret, you know I love you more than life itself, don't you?" I squeezed his hand back and said, "Of course I knew. I didn't ask why he needed to say it like that, with such urgency, such finality. I didn't want to know." 3 days later, he was gone. The day after we buried Robert, I woke up to an empty house that echoed with 42 years of memories. The coffee maker sat unused on the counter. His reading glasses lay folded on his nightstand. His blue slippers were still positioned perfectly beside the bed, as if waiting for feet that would never fill them again. I moved through that first morning in a fog, trying to remember how to breathe in a world without Robert Ellis. It was nearly noon when I finally gathered the strength to check our mail. Between the sympathy cards and flower delivery notices, there was an envelope from First National Bank, our bank for 35 years. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting maybe a condolence note from our banker, Harold, who'd helped us through mortgages and car loans and college tuitions. Instead, I found an account statement that made my blood run cold. Our joint emergency fund, the account we'd carefully built over decades, had a balance of $512. Just last month, when I'd deposited a check from my pension, it had contained over $50,000. $50,000 we'd saved for medical emergencies, for home repairs, for the security of knowing we could handle whatever life threw at us. I stared at the statement, the numbers blurring through my tears. There had to be a mistake. Banks made errors all the time. Robert had probably moved it to a higher yield account and forgotten to tell me in the chaos of his final weeks. My hands shook as I called the bank, asking for Harold, needing to hear that everything was fine. But Harold's voice was strange when he came on the line, uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ellis, I'm so sorry for your loss," he began, and then paused for so long, thought we'd been disconnected. "About the account. I assumed you knew. Mr. Ellis came in with James about a month ago. He added James as a co-signer and, well, there have been several large withdrawals since then." The room tilted. I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. "James? My son James?" "Yes, ma'am. He had full authorization. The withdrawals were all legal, properly documented. The largest one was last week, $43,000. James said it was for medical expenses, specialists for Robert's treatment. But Robert had excellent insurance. We'd never paid more than small copays. And last week, Robert had been in hospice care, beyond the help of any specialist. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, Harold's voice still emerging timidly from the speaker on the floor, asking if I was still there, if I needed anything, if there was someone he could call for me. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and asked Harold to send me the withdrawal records. Then I hung up and walked slowly to Robert's study. His laptop was gone. So were several boxes of files I'd seen just days before. The filing cabinet stood open, entire sections empty. The drawer marked financial holdings that James had been looking through contained only old utility bills and appliance warranties. My legs gave out and I sank into Robert's desk chair. The leather still smelled like him, that combination of Old Spice and peppermints he always kept in his pocket. On his desk calendar, in his shaky handwriting, he'd written notes for the past month. James, 2 p.m. Sarah, legal papers. Michael, house deed. And on the day before he died, in letters so faint I could barely read them, "Forgive me, Margaret." I called my daughter Sarah, needing to hear there was an explanation. "Mom," she answered too quickly, too brightly. "How are you holding up? Do you need anything?" "Sarah, do you know why James withdrew $43,000 from our emergency account?" The silence stretched so long I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. "Mom, you sound tired. This probably isn't the best time to worry about finances. Why don't you rest? James and I will come by tomorrow to help sort through everything." "Sarah, please, just tell me what's happening." "Everything's going to be fine, Mom. Dad made sure of that. We're taking care of everything, just like he asked us to. You don't need to worry about anything anymore." She hung up before I could respond. When I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. James's phone did the same. Michael didn't answer at all. I sat in Robert's chair as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Somewhere in this house, Robert had left me answers. He must have. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and disappointment. Richard Brennan had been Robert's attorney for 20 years, had been at our anniversary parties, our grandchildren's christenings. Now he couldn't quite meet my eyes as he shuffled papers on his mahogany desk. My 3 children sat across from me, dressed in their finest clothes like they were attending a celebration, rather than the reading of their father's will. "Before we begin," Richard said, clearing his throat, "I need to inform you, Margaret, that Robert made several significant changes to his estate planning in the weeks before his passing." James leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who already knew what was coming. Sarah examined her manicured nails. Michael actually had the audacity to check his phone, smiling at something on the screen. "The business," Richard continued, his voice heavy with something like regret. "Ellis Construction, valued at approximately $3.2 million, has been transferred entirely to James, Sarah, and Michael Ellis, to be divided equally among them." The words hit me like physical blows. The business I'd sacrificed my medical degree to help build. The company I'd answered phones for when Robert couldn't afford a secretary. The empire built on my double shifts and missed meals. "The house at 1847 Maple Avenue," Richard's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, "has been transferred to Sarah Ellis. Our home, where I'd raised my babies, painted nurseries, hosted 42 Christmas mornings." Sarah finally looked up, but not at me. She stared at a point just over my shoulder, her jaw set with determination. "The vacation cabin in Lake Tahoe goes to Michael Ellis. The investment portfolio, approximately $800,000, has been divided equally among the 3 children. The 2 vehicles, the boat, and all remaining personal property have also been distributed among them." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a croak. What did Robert leave me? Richard finally met my eyes, and I saw pity there that made me want to scream. "You retain your personal belongings, your jewelry, and..." There's a life insurance policy of $50,000 in your name. $50,000. After 42 years of marriage, of building a life and fortune together, I was worth $50,000. This can't be legal, I whispered. I'm his wife. California is a community property state. James finally spoke, his voice carrying that patronizing doctor tone I'd come to despise. Dad was very careful, Mom. Everything was properly transferred before his death. Gifts to his children, all completely legal. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. We also have documents showing you were aware of and agreed to these transfers. He slid papers across the table. My signature was on them, or something that looked like my signature. Documents dated when I'd been sleeping in the hospital chair beside Robert, when I'd been exhausted and borderline delirious from caregiving. I didn't sign these, I said, my voice stronger now. I would never have agreed to this. You, Mom. Sarah's voice was gentle, as if speaking to a child. You've been under a lot of stress. Dad mentioned you'd been confused lately, forgetting things. That's why he wanted to make sure everything was properly handled before. She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though I saw no tears. We have a nurse who can testify to your confusion, Michael added, finally putting his phone away. Diana Thompson. She took care of Dad during his final weeks. She documented several instances of you being disoriented, forgetting medications, mixing up dates. Diana. The private nurse they'd insisted on hiring, who always seemed to be watching me, taking notes. I'd thought she was documenting Robert's condition. You planned this, I said, the full weight of the betrayal crashing over me. All of you. Those visits, the papers, the withdrawals from our account. You convinced Robert I was losing my mind. We convinced him to protect his assets, James corrected with the cold precision of a surgeon. You're 68 years old, Mom. You don't need a $3 million business or an $800,000 portfolio. We've made sure you're taken care of. Sarah says you can stay in the house as long as you need, and we'll give you a monthly allowance. An allowance? From my own children. From the fortune I'd helped build with my sweat and sacrifice. Your father would never do this to me, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I remembered his tears, his final forgive me, the way he couldn't meet my eyes those last weeks. Dad did exactly what he thought was best, Sarah said, standing up, smoothing her designer dress. We all did. The papers are ironclad, Mom. Richard made sure of that. You can fight it if you want, waste the little money you have on lawyers, but you'll lose. They left me there in Richard's office, staring at the papers that stripped away everything except my memories and a small life insurance policy. I spent the next 3 days in Robert's study, going through every remaining piece of paper, every file they'd left behind as worthless. That's when I started finding the breadcrumbs of a much larger betrayal. It started with a credit card statement tucked inside an old tax return, a new card in Robert's name I'd never seen before, with charges dating back 6 months. Expensive dinners at restaurants Robert and I had never visited, all during times when I was at my volunteer shifts. The charges painted a picture. The Riverside Steakhouse, party of 5, Laurent's French Bistro, private dining room rental, the Marriott downtown, conference room booking. My children hadn't just been meeting with Robert, they'd been courting him, planning their takeover like corporate raiders eyeing a hostile acquisition. Then I found Diana Thompson's business card stuck to the back of another document. But she wasn't just a private nurse. The card read, Diana Thompson, RN MSW, Geriatric Care Management and Legal Medical Consultation. Her website, which I looked up on Robert's old tablet, advertised services including capacity evaluations for estate planning and family mediation for elder care transitions. The testimonials were all from grateful children who'd used her services to protect family assets and ensure proper elder care decisions. My hands trembled as I called Medicare to check our records. The kind woman on the phone confirmed what I suspected. Every single claim Diana had submitted for Robert's care had also included diagnostic codes for me. Mild cognitive impairment, age-related memory loss, caregiver stress syndrome. She'd been building a medical paper trail, creating evidence of my supposed decline. But it went deeper still. In Robert's email, which I finally guessed the password for, our anniversary date, the one he'd kept asking me about, I found exchanges with someone named Marcus Chen, a wealth management advisor. The emails dated back 8 months, 2 months before Robert's diagnosis turned terminal. Marcus specialized in asset protection strategies and generational wealth transfer. One email contained an attachment titled Ellis Family Trust Restructuring Proposal. The document outlined exactly what had happened. Every transfer, every maneuver, all designed to move assets out of our joint ownership while avoiding gift taxes and legal challenges. The email thread revealed the worst part. It had been James's idea initially. He'd connected Robert with Marcus after learning about the terminal diagnosis. Dad, one email from James read, Marcus helped the Weathertons protect their estate when Mrs. Weatherton developed Alzheimer's. He can ensure everything you've built goes where you want it to go, not to government taxes or medical facilities. My son had seen his father's cancer as an opportunity. I discovered they'd even prepared for me to fight back. Sarah had consulted with 3 different law firms about the likelihood of me contesting the will. The consensus was brutal. With the medical documentation, the properly executed transfers, and my supposed signatures, I'd have less than a 10% chance of success. The legal fees would consume the entire life insurance payout before we even got to trial. Michael's contribution was perhaps the cruelest. He'd researched senior living facilities, sending Robert brochures for luxury assisted living communities where I could be properly cared for. The one he'd highlighted cost exactly $2,000 a month, precisely what they'd planned for my allowance. They weren't just taking everything. They'd calculated exactly how little they could leave me while still appearing to provide for their mother. The cousin who'd helped, Marcus Chen's assistant, turned out to be Jennifer Walsh, Sarah's college roommate who'd married into the Chen family. The entire network of advisors, lawyers, and medical professionals had been carefully cultivated, a conspiracy wrapped in professional legitimacy. I found Robert's journal hidden in his workshop, behind his collection of vintage hammers. His handwriting, growing shakier as the pages progressed, told the story from his perspective. They'd convinced him I was showing early signs of dementia. Diana had pointed out instances of my confusion, times when I'd been exhausted from caregiving, when I'd mixed up appointment times after staying awake for 30 hours straight. They'd twisted my devotion into evidence of decline. They showed me videos, Robert had written. Margaret seeming confused at the grocery store, repeating herself at dinner. I don't remember these things happening, but the videos don't lie. I have to protect her from herself, from losing everything to medical costs or being taken advantage of. The children will take care of her. They promised. The final entry, dated the day before he died, was barely legible. Something's not right. Margaret seems fine, sharp as ever. What have I done? The safe. Must tell her about the safe. Our real treasure. God forgive me. But he died before he could explain what he meant. The journal slipped from my numb fingers, Robert's final words blurring through tears that wouldn't stop coming. I crumpled onto his workshop floor, surrounded by the tools he'd lovingly collected over 4 decades, each one now belonging to Michael, who couldn't tell a Phillips from a flathead screwdriver. The concrete was cold against my cheek, and I could smell sawdust and WD-40, the essence of Robert that still lingered in this space they hadn't thought worth ransacking. The sobs came in waves, each one pulling from somewhere so deep I thought my ribs might crack from the force. 42 years. 42 years of building a life together, and he'd spent his last weeks believing I was losing my mind. Every confused moment he'd mentioned in his journal I could explain. The grocery store incident? I'd been awake for 36 hours after his chemotherapy caused a reaction. The repeated dinner story? I'd been telling it to different grandchildren as they arrived, not repeating it to the same person. I crawled to the corner where we'd stored photo albums, the ones from before everything went digital. My shaking hands opened the first one. Our wedding day, April 15th, 1981. Robert, young and handsome in his rented tuxedo that was too short in the sleeves. Me in my mother's wedding dress, altered 3 times to fit, smiling like I'd won the lottery. We'd been so poor then. Our reception held in the church basement, with casseroles made by relatives. Page after page of memories assaulted me. James's first birthday, where I'd worked a double shift, come home to bake a cake from scratch, then fallen asleep standing up while Robert took pictures. Sarah's high school graduation, where she'd thanked me for all the sacrifices in her valedictorian speech, words that now felt like mockery. Michael's wedding, where I'd given him my mother's ring because he couldn't afford one for his bride, promising it was an investment in his happiness. I found the photo from Robert's first big construction contract. We'd celebrated with champagne, the cheap kind from the grocery store, in plastic cups on the floor of our empty living room because we'd sold our furniture to buy his equipment. I'd been 8 months pregnant with Sarah, wearing one of Robert's shirts because nothing else fit, toasting to our future while eating Chinese takeout on cardboard boxes. The memories became weapons, each one cutting deeper than the last. Every soccer game attended in my nursing scrubs, every birthday party hosted on 4 hours of sleep, every Christmas morning where I'd wrapped presents at 3 a.m. after a night shift because the children needed magic in their lives. The time I'd sold plasma twice a week for 6 months to pay for James's medical school application, fees. The weekend I'd spent teaching Sarah to drive in the hospital parking lot, patient through every jerky stop and tearful frustration. The night I'd held Michael through his divorce, telling him he deserved love, that he was worthy, that family meant everything. "You were my babies," I whispered to the empty workshop. "I gave you everything, my body, my dreams, my youth, my sleep, my health, everything." The photo that finally broke me completely was from last Christmas, just 10 months ago. The entire family gathered around our dining room table, Robert already thin from treatment, but smiling, wearing the silly Santa hat the grandkids insisted on. I was beside him, my arm around his shoulders, looking at him with such pure love it made my chest ache. And surrounding us, my 3 children and their families, all smiling, all playing the part of the devoted family, while apparently already planning their conspiracy. In the background of that photo, barely visible, was Robert's desk with papers spread across it. Had they already been working on it then? Had Sarah's hug that Christmas been calculated? Had James's toast to the best parents anyone could ask for been mockery? Had Michael's children been coached to be extra affectionate with their grandfather, softening him for manipulation? I lay on that cold workshop floor until darkness fell, until my tears ran dry, until my throat was raw from sobbing. The woman who'd gotten up was different from the one who'd collapsed there. The mother in me, the part that had always made excuses, always forgiven, always sacrificed. She died on that concrete floor, surrounded by the tools of a man who'd betrayed her with his dying breath. What remained was someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd survived working in trauma wards, someone who'd fought insurance companies for her patients, someone who'd once faced down a drunk man twice her size, who'd been threatening a young nurse, someone who wasn't going to let her children get away with this. At 3 a.m, I pulled myself off that workshop floor. My knees protested, my back screamed, but I stood anyway. The tears had left salt trails on my cheeks that I didn't bother to wipe away. I walked to the kitchen, each step deliberate, measured. The house felt different now, not empty but electric, like the air before a storm. I made coffee in the old percolator, not the fancy machine Robert had bought last year. The familiar gurgling sound grounded me as I sat at our scarred kitchen table, the one where my children had done homework, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where they'd signed the papers to destroy me. The bitter coffee burned my throat, but I welcomed the pain. It meant I could still feel something besides betrayal. My reflection in the dark window showed a stranger, hair wild from lying on the floor, eyes swollen and red, Robert's old cardigan hanging loose on my frame. But there was something else in that reflection. Something my children had forgotten existed. The same woman who'd held a patient's severed artery closed with her bare hands for 10 minutes until the surgeon arrived. The same woman who'd worked 3 jobs while pregnant to keep us afloat. The same woman who'd faced down death 100 times in the emergency ward and never flinched. Margaret Ellis wasn't just a sweet old lady who baked cookies. She was a warrior who'd chosen to sheath her sword to raise her family. But they'd forgotten about the sword. I thought about Robert's last coherent words in his journal. The safe. Must tell her about the safe, our real treasure. He'd tried to tell me something that final day, gripping my hand with surprising strength, but the morphine had stolen his words. Whatever was in that safe, Robert had hidden it from our children. Even in his manipulated state, some part of him had protected something for me. But first, I needed allies. My children had their network of professionals. I needed my own. Thomas Brennan came to mind immediately, Robert's best friend from his Army days, retired FBI, who'd moved back to town 5 years ago. He'd called after the funeral, said those exact words, "Margaret, if you need anything at all, you call me, day or night." He'd seemed angry at the funeral, barely speaking to my children, his jaw clenched when James gave his eulogy about protecting Dad's legacy. Maybe Thomas knew something. Then there was Dorothy Chen, Mrs. Chen from next door, who'd mentioned seeing my children's cars during my volunteer shifts. Dorothy was a retired forensic accountant who'd worked for the IRS for 30 years. We'd shared tea dozens of times, and she'd often said I was too trusting, too good for this world. "Margaret," she'd say, "numbers don't lie like people do. They always tell the truth if you know how to read them." I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the same kind Robert used for his business plans, and started writing. Not a victim's lament, but a battle strategy. Every document I needed to find, every conversation I needed to record, every piece of evidence that might exist. My handwriting grew stronger with each line, the tremor of grief replaced by the steady hand that had inserted hundreds of IVs, that had signed countless medical charts, that had written Christmas cards to my ungrateful children for 37 years. The secret safe was key. Robert had been meticulous about his possessions, everything in its place. But where would he hide something from our children? Not his study. They'd been all over that room, not our bedroom. Too obvious. It had to be somewhere they wouldn't think to look, somewhere that meant something only to us. Our real treasure, I whispered. And suddenly I knew. Not money or documents. He meant something else entirely. Robert, even dying, even confused, had left me a trail. He'd been the romantic one, the one who kept every love note, every anniversary card, the one who'd built that special hiding spot during our first year of marriage when we had nothing worth hiding except our love letters. I stood up, coffee abandoned, energy surging through my exhausted body. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky the same shade of pink as the roses Robert had planted for our anniversary. Somewhere in this house that was no longer mine, in a safe my children didn't know existed, was Robert's final gift to me, his attempt at redemption, his last love letter. But I wouldn't go looking just yet. First I had calls to make. If my children wanted a war, I'd give them one they'd never forget. The mother they'd known was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I picked up the phone and dialed Thomas's number. He answered on the second ring, alert despite the early hour. "Margaret, are you all right?" "No," I said, my voice steady as steel. "But I'm about to be." Thomas arrived within an hour, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same intense expression I'd seen when he'd worked federal cases. Dorothy Chen came through the back door 10 minutes later with her laptop and a box of files. "I've been keeping records," she said simply, setting up at my kitchen table. "Your children weren't as subtle as they thought." We worked through that first day like a tactical unit. Thomas had connections everywhere: former FBI colleagues, lawyers who owed him favors, investigators who specialized in elder fraud. "What they did might be legal on paper," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's airtight. There's always something they missed." Dorothy's revelation was the first breakthrough. "The business valuation," she said, pulling up documents on her screen. "I have a friend at the county assessor's office. Ellis Construction was valued at $3.2 million for the transfer. But just 6 weeks earlier, your James had it privately appraised at $8.5 million for a loan application." She showed me the paper trail. "They deliberately undervalued it for tax purposes. That's fraud." Thomas leaned forward. "And this nurse, Diana Thompson?" I ran her background. "She lost her license in Nevada 5 years ago for falsifying medical records. She's practicing here under a reinstated license, but she never disclosed her past violations to your family. Every document she created about your supposed cognitive decline is potentially worthless." I told them about Robert's mention of a safe, our real treasure. Thomas's eyes lit up. "Don't look for it yet. If it contains what I think it might, we need to document everything first. Your children might be watching the house. Sarah owns it now, remember? She could claim anything you find belongs to her." Over the next week, we built our case methodically. I wore a small recorder Thomas gave me, the kind that looked like a button, and visited each of my children separately. They were surprisingly eager to see me, probably checking if I was broken, enough to accept their generous arrangement quietly. James was the most arrogant. Over lunch at his country club, he actually bragged about the plan. "It was really quite elegant, Mom," he said, cutting into his $40 steak. "We protected Dad's legacy from inheritance taxes, medical liens, potential lawsuits. You should be grateful we were thinking ahead." Every word recorded, every admission captured. Sarah was different, almost guilty, constantly justifying. "Mom, you have to understand we did this for you too. What if you'd gotten sick? What if someone had taken advantage of you? At least this way we can make sure you're cared for." I asked her about the house, my voice weak and confused. "Oh, don't worry," she assured me, patting my hand condescendingly. "You can stay as long as you want. I mean, within reason. Maybe a few more years?" All recorded. Michael was the sloppiest. After 2 beers, he admitted they'd been planning since Dad's first diagnosis. "James said we had to move fast before you caught on. Sorry, Mom, but James said you were getting a bit slow, you know? Not as sharp. It was better this way." He even mentioned the cousin Jennifer's role, how she'd created false documentation. Pretty clever, right? All totally legal-looking. Dorothy, meanwhile, had discovered something incredible. The $800,000 in investments they'd claimed, it was actually closer to $2 million. They'd hidden assets in offshore accounts, thinking the IRS wouldn't notice. "But they made a mistake," Dorothy explained. "They used the company's EIN number for one transfer. That makes it wire fraud, a federal crime." Thomas brought in a forensic tech specialist who found deleted emails on an old tablet, correspondence between my children planning every detail. One email from Sarah stood out. "Mom's getting suspicious. Diana needs to up the documentation. Maybe we should consider power of attorney before Dad passes." But the masterpiece of our plan came from an unexpected source. The young cashier at Morrison's Market, where Robert and I had shopped for 20 years, reached out through Thomas. "Mrs. Ellis was always kind to me," she said. "I thought you should know. I have security footage from the store. That day your daughter said you were confused. You were helping me with a computer problem, explaining the software perfectly. You were brilliant, not confused at all. We had them. Financial fraud, elder abuse, falsified medical records, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Thomas's lawyer friend, a former prosecutor named Patricia Willems, who specialized in elder abuse cases, reviewed everything. "This is enough to not just contest the will," she said, "but to bring criminal charges." The plan was set. Patricia would file the paperwork challenging the will transfers on grounds of undue influence and fraud. Thomas would simultaneously contact the FBI about the wire fraud. Dorothy would report the tax fraud to the IRS. But first, we needed whatever was in Robert's safe. "Once we start this," Thomas warned, "there's no going back. They'll come at you with everything they have." I looked at my team, these angels who'd appeared when I needed them most, and smiled for the first time since Robert's death. They already took everything. What more can they do? Patricia Willems scheduled the meeting for a Thursday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after Robert's death. She'd sent formal letters to all 3 of my children, their spouses, and even cousin Jennifer, requesting their presence for an urgent matter regarding the estate of Robert Ellis. The meeting would be held at the offices of Brennan and Associates, the same law firm where Richard had destroyed my life with his reading of Robert's will. The night before, Thomas helped me search for Robert's secret safe. We started in the workshop, checking every wall, every floorboard. Nothing. Then I remembered something Robert had said during our first year of marriage, when we lived in that tiny apartment above the bakery. "Our love is the only treasure worth hiding," he'd told me, building a small compartment behind our bedroom baseboard to store our love letters. In our bedroom closet, behind 42 years' worth of Christmas decorations and photo albums, I found it. A section of the wall that looked identical to every other. But when pressed in just the right spot, it clicked open. Inside was a modern safe, installed recently based on the fresh drywall dust. The combination came to me instantly. Not our anniversary, but the date of our first kiss. Under the bleachers at his high school football game, November 15, 1979. Inside the safe lay a single manila envelope, and beneath it, an old photograph from our wedding day. But this wasn't just any photo. This was the one Robert's best man had taken moments after the ceremony, when Robert had whispered his special promise to me, the one only we knew about. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. What I found inside changed everything. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, not in the black morning clothes I'd worn for weeks, but in my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to my nursing pinning ceremony 43 years ago. It still fit, mostly. Dorothy helped me with my hair, pulling it back into the same neat bun I'd worn during my working years. Thomas stood guard, making sure none of my children tried to ambush me early. We arrived at the law office 30 minutes before the scheduled time. Patricia had arranged everything perfectly. The conference room was packed, not just with the required parties, but with witnesses. Several members of the hospital board where James worked, parents from the private school where Sarah served on the PTA board, business associates of Michael's. Dorothy had reached out to them all, suggesting they might want to attend, given the serious nature of the allegations. Even Diana Thompson was there, subpoenaed by Patricia, looking nervous, and fidgeting with her phone. Harold from the bank sat in the corner, armed with records. The young cashier from Morrison's Market had taken the day off to attend. Mrs. Chen had brought 2 other neighbors who'd witnessed my children's suspicious behavior. Richard Brennan, Robert's lawyer, looked deeply uncomfortable as people continued filing in. He kept checking his watch, shuffling papers, avoiding everyone's eyes. He knew something was coming but wasn't sure what. My children arrived together, a united front in their expensive clothes and confident smiles. James wore his best suit, the one he saved for hospital board meetings. Sarah had gotten her hair professionally done, wearing the diamond necklace she'd bought with my stolen money. Michael tried to look casual but kept pulling at his collar. Their spouses trailed behind, looking annoyed at being pulled away from their Thursday routines. "What is this about?" James demanded, scanning the packed room. His confidence wavered slightly when he saw his hospital colleagues. This was supposed to be a private family meeting. "Sit down, James," I said, my voice carrying the authority of every emergency room I'd ever commanded. All of you, sit." They sat, but Sarah couldn't help herself. "Mother, whatever this is about, you're embarrassing yourself. Dad's will was very clear." "Yes," Patricia interrupted, standing and commanding the room's attention. "Let's talk about Robert's will, and his real will, and the conspiracy you three orchestrated to defraud your mother of millions of dollars." The room went silent. James's face had gone pale. Sarah's hand moved to her necklace. Michael looked like he might bolt for the door. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we begin reviewing the evidence of financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy, I believe Mrs. Ellis has something she'd like to share. Something from Robert's private safe, the one you didn't know existed." Every eye in the room turned to me. I stood slowly, my hand on the manila envelope that contained Robert's final message. My children stared, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Your father left me one last gift," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Would you like to know what it was?" I opened the manila envelope with deliberate slowness, watching my children's faces transform from annoyance to concern to barely concealed panic. Inside was a photograph. Robert in his hospital bed, dated just 2 days before his death. But this wasn't a casual picture. Robert was sitting up, fully alert, holding that day's newspaper in one hand and legal documents in the other. His eyes were clear, focused, blazing with the intelligence I'd fallen in love with 42 years ago. "This photo was taken by Thomas," I said, holding it up for everyone to see. "November 2nd, 2024, at 3:47 p.m., 2 days before Robert died. Notice the newspaper. You can see the headline about the presidential election results. Notice his eyes. Does this look like a man with a confused wife? Does this look like someone who needed protection from his spouse's cognitive decline?" But it was what came next that destroyed them. Patricia connected her laptop to the conference room screen. "Mr. Brennan, you prepared a video will for Robert Ellis on November the 2nd, didn't you? One that you were instructed to keep sealed unless certain conditions were met?" Richard's hands shook as he nodded. Robert said to only play it if his children contested Margaret's inheritance or if evidence emerged of wrongdoing. The video began. Robert appeared on screen, propped up in his hospital bed but undeniably lucid. Thomas was visible in the corner, holding that day's newspaper as verification. Robert's voice, though weak, was crystal clear. "My name is Robert James Ellis. It is November 2nd, 2024, and I am of completely sound mind, as verified by Dr. Jonathan Hartley, Chief of Psychiatry at Riverside General, who examined me this morning." He held up a document. "This is his signed attestation." Robert continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "6 months ago, my children began a systematic campaign to convince me that my wife, Margaret, was showing signs of dementia. They hired Diana Thompson, presenting her as a private nurse for my care. But her real purpose was to document false evidence of Margaret's supposed decline. I have played along with their scheme to protect my wife." Gasps filled the room. James stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Sit down or I'll have security escort you out," Patricia said coldly. James sat. Robert's video continued. "The companies and assets I transferred to my children are shells, empty corporations with impressive names but no actual value. The real assets, my true construction business, our investments, everything Margaret and I built together, were moved into an irrevocable trust with Margaret as sole beneficiary. My friend Thomas Brennan, former FBI agent, helped me execute this plan while my children thought I was sleeping." The camera zoomed in on the documents Robert held. "These are the real papers filed with the state, transferable only upon my death. The Ellis Family Trust containing approximately $8.7 million in assets belongs entirely to Margaret Ann Ellis. The businesses my children received are worth exactly $1 each, the minimum required for legal transfer." Sarah let out a strangled sound. Michael's face had turned green. James was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to reach his lawyer, but Robert wasn't done. I also recorded every conversation with my children regarding this scheme. The video showed Robert holding a small recorder. James, on October 15th, explaining how they could protect my assets from Margaret. Sarah, on October 22nd, coaching Diana Thompson on what symptoms to document. Michael, on October 28th, laughing about how Mom won't know what hit her. The next part broke my heart all over again, even though I'd already watched it with Thomas. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, my beloved, I'm sorry for the deception. I needed them to believe they'd won so they would reveal their true selves. You deserve better than my cowardice these last months, but I couldn't let them destroy you after I was gone. Robert composed himself and continued, To my children, if you're watching this, it means you've attempted to steal from your mother. The FBI has been notified of your fraudulent activities. The IRS has been informed of your tax evasion. The State Medical Board will be investigating Diana Thompson's falsified records and James's involvement in medical fraud. The shell companies you received? They come with significant tax liabilities I've carefully documented, approximately $2 million in corporate. Taxes due immediately upon transfer. The room erupted. Diana Thompson tried to leave but found Thomas blocking the door. James was shouting about lawsuits, Sarah was crying, real tears this time, and Michael had his head in his hands. The video had one final moment. Robert looked directly at the camera. Margaret, check our special place, behind the photo in the safe. I left you my real last letter. I love you beyond words, beyond death, beyond forgiveness. Forever yours, Robert. Patricia paused the video and turned to my children. You've been served. Criminal fraud charges, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Your assets, the real ones you bought with stolen money, have been frozen pending investigation. Oh, and those shell companies? The tax bills are real, due in 30 days. The weeks following the revelation moved with swift, merciless precision. James was the first to fall. The hospital board placed him on immediate administrative leave pending investigation into his involvement in medical fraud. His colleagues, the same ones who'd witnessed his humiliation at the meeting, distanced themselves completely. The medical board launched a formal investigation that would drag on for months. His Mercedes was repossessed when the FBI froze his accounts. It turned out he'd bought it with money from our joint account the day after Robert's funeral. Sarah's descent was more public. Someone, I never asked who, leaked the video to her country club friends. Within days, she was asked to resign from every charity board, every committee, every social position she'd cultivated. The private school where she'd served on the PTA board quietly suggested her twins might be happier elsewhere. Her husband, a real estate developer who'd built his reputation on integrity, filed for divorce within 3 weeks. He couldn't afford to be associated with fraud, he said. The house, my house that she'd stolen, had to be sold immediately to pay her portion of the tax liability. Michael's business collapsed almost overnight. His investors, spooked by the fraud charges, pulled out en masse. The vacation cabin in Lake Tahoe that Robert had left him. It came with a $400,000 tax bill that he couldn't pay. He declared bankruptcy within 2 months, his wife standing by him but barely. They moved in with her parents in Ohio, starting over with nothing. Diana Thompson lost her nursing license permanently this time. The investigation revealed she'd done this to 3 other families, always getting away with it until now. She faced criminal charges in multiple states. The last I heard, she was working at a grocery store in Nevada, awaiting trial. Cousin Jennifer, Sarah's college friend who'd helped orchestrate everything, was disbarred. Turns out, the California Bar Association takes fraudulent document creation very seriously, especially when it involves elder abuse. As for me, I move forward with unexpected peace. The Ellis family trust that Robert had protected was worth more than even he'd known. Thomas discovered additional assets hidden away, investments Robert had made quietly over the years, always in my name, always protected. The final tally was close to $10 million. I sold the family home. Too many memories, both beautiful and bitter. Instead, I bought a modest cottage by the ocean in Carmel, the place Robert and I had honeymooned all those years ago, when we could barely afford gas to get there. The sound of waves replaced the silence of betrayal, but I wasn't heartless. Despite everything, they were still my children, still the babies I'd carried and loved. When the dust settled and the legal consequences were faced, I set up education trusts for my grandchildren, money they could only access for college, controlled by an independent trustee. They shouldn't suffer for their parents' greed. For my children themselves, I offered each a choice. They could receive a modest monthly allowance, $2,000, enough to survive but not thrive, managed by trustees who would require proof of employment and clean drug tests, or they could receive nothing and make their own way. All three chose the allowance, their pride crushed, but their need greater. James works at a small clinic in rural Nevada now, making a fraction of his former salary. He sent me a letter 6 months later. No apology, but an acknowledgement that he'd misunderstood the situation. I didn't reply. Sarah works as a receptionist at a dental office. She tried to visit me once, bringing flowers and tears. I let her speak, then quietly asked her to leave. When you can explain why you did this without blaming anyone else, we can talk, I told her. She hasn't come back yet. Michael sent the only real apology, handwritten, 3 pages long. He admitted everything, took responsibility, said he'd been weak and followed James's lead. I keep the letter, but haven't responded. Maybe someday, maybe never. The special place Robert mentioned in the video contained one final gift. Behind our wedding photo was a letter, dated just days before he died. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth. I knew. I've known for weeks. The medication didn't make me confused. It made me careful. Every document they made me sign was meaningless. Every transfer was to shells. Every manipulation they attempted, I turned against them with Thomas's help. I couldn't tell you because your genuine distress had to be real for them to believe they'd won. Forgive me for that cruelty. You gave me 42 years of joy, of love, of partnership. You sacrificed your dreams for our family. You deserved better than children who could plot against you. This final deception was my last gift, protecting you from beyond the grave. All my love, forever and always, Robert. P.S. The roses in the garden will bloom beautifully this spring. I had Thomas arrange for a gardener to tend them until you decide what to do with the house. Some things are too precious to let die. 6 months have passed since that day in the conference room when everything changed. I'm sitting on my deck in Carmel now, watching the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that remind me of Robert's roses. The cottage is small but perfect. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with windows facing the ocean, and a garden where I've planted new roses. They're just starting to bloom, their petals unfurling like hope itself. Thomas visits often, bringing his wife Helen for weekend dinners where we laugh more than we talk about the past. Dorothy Chen moved to Monterey to be closer to her daughter, but we meet for tea every Thursday. She still insists on checking my finances, making sure every penny is accounted for. Trust no one completely, she says with a wink, except your accountant. The nursing scholarship I established in Robert's name has already helped 12 young women pursue their dreams, the dreams I once had to abandon. Each semester, I receive letters from the recipients telling me about their classes, their struggles, their victories. One girl, Maria, wrote that she'd worked 3 jobs before the scholarship. Now she can focus on her studies. She wants to be a trauma nurse. I told her about the importance of steady hands and a steadier heart. We write regularly now. I volunteer at the local hospice 3 days a week, holding hands, listening to stories, being present for final moments. It's taught me that Robert's deception, painful as it was, came from love. Misguided, perhaps, but love nonetheless. The patients I sit with often speak of regrets, of children who disappointed them, of love that survived betrayal. I tell them that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to carry the lesson instead of the anger. Last week, I received an unexpected call. My eldest granddaughter, James's daughter Emma, is 18 now, heading to college. She asked if she could visit. "I want to know the truth," she said. "Not their version or yours. The truth." So she came, and we sat on the same deck, and I told her everything. She cried. Then she asked, "How do you love someone who betrays you?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "You don't stop loving them," I finally said. "Love isn't a faucet you can turn off, but you learn to love them from a distance, safely. You love the memory of who they were, mourn who they became, and protect yourself from who they are now. Sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping away." Emma understood. She's studying psychology, wants to understand what makes people choose greed over family. I've added her to my will, not the trust fund for education, but something more when I'm gone. She has Robert's eyes, that same sharp intelligence, but also something her father lost along the way: integrity. The photograph from Robert's safe sits on my mantel now, next to our wedding picture. 2 days before, death. He fought through morphine and pain to protect me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without casualties. But it was love. Complicated and fierce and final. Every morning I touch his face in that photo and whisper, "Thank you." Not for the money or the justice, but for proving that 42 years meant as much to him as they did to me. The hardest lesson I've learned is this: when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. My children showed me they valued money over mother, inheritance over integrity. Robert showed me that love can be strategic, that protection can look like deception, that sometimes the greatest gift is revealing the truth about those we trust most. But here's what I want to know from you. Could you forgive children who plotted against you while you were grieving? Would you have given them any allowance at all, or cut them off completely? If you discovered a loved one was planning to betray you, would you confront them immediately, or wait to expose them when it mattered most? And perhaps the most important question: how do we raise children who won't be blinded by greed? Because somewhere between birthday parties and business deals, between bedtime stories and bankruptcy threats, I lost them. Or maybe I never really had them at all. Share your thoughts below. Have you experienced family betrayal over inheritance? How did you handle it? What would you have done differently in my place? Remember this: your true worth isn't measured in dollars or assets, but in the lives you touch and the love you leave behind. Robert knew that in the end. His millions couldn't save his life, but his love protected mine even after death. And sometimes that's all the inheritance we really need.